Hello there, and welcome back to the Metagame, the web series where we'll be talking not only about board games, but also talking about board games. I'm your host, Chaz Marler, and the way that this show works is that I'm going to give a short presentation on a topic, and then afterwards I'll skim through the YouTube chats for questions, and we'll have an informal Q&A session about the topic as we go along. Plus, we'll discuss anything else that comes up on your mind. Because you can have any topic, any statement that you post in the YouTube chat considered for the mutual Q&A portion of the show, have it considered by adding the hashtag that looks like this right there, ding, hashtag TMG. Add that to what you post in the YouTube chat area, and I'll use the search tool on my web browser to highlight those posts, and we'll try to cover them as we go along. Now, as always, I can't address every single post that's posted in the YouTube chat area, but I do try to go through and reread everything after the show's over in case anything's missed. So it looks like, excuse me, looks like everyone can hear me and everything's great. So let's get started with today's episode, which is in response to a couple of things, actually, that coincidentally both came up this week. First of all, I received a comment, a post on Twitter that asked me, how did you get involved with the game company that you're working for? And as many of you know, last month I started working with Passport Game Studios as their social media and customer support manager. So I'm going to come back to the specific answer that I gave in response to that tweet in a minute, because before I could even send my tweet reply back to this person, the news broke that longtime board game reviewer Lance Mixter, also known as Undead Viking on his YouTube channel, had accepted a position with Tasty Minstrel Games as their chief content creator and social media manager. So here was this question I had received about getting involved in the industry, and news broke of another content creator getting involved in the industry. So with Lance, this brings the number of content creators who have recently gotten involved in the industry up to at least 5. And I know there's got to be more, but recently there's at least 5 that have come up. There's, of course, Lance. Ding. There we go. Hi, Lance. There's Lance, who's working for Tasty Minstrel Games now. There's, of course, me. I'm working for Passport Game Studios, as I mentioned. There's Hunter Shelburne from Weapons Grade channel, who now works for Steve Jackson Games. There's Scott Morris, of course, who started out with Crits Happen and worked his way into Arcane Wonders and is now the president of Passport Game Studios. And, of course, there's Tom Vassell, who, of course, has the Dice Tower YouTube channel and podcast, and has co-designed the board game Nothing Personal, and is involved with the Dice Tower Essentials line at Arcane Wonders. So there's just some recent-ish, examples of people getting involved from the social media and YouTube side of things, getting involved in the board game industry. So, which brings me back to my answer that I had for the original Twitter question that I received. How did I get involved in the board game industry? Well, like everyone that you see here, I think we all kind of got involved in the same way. And I can't speak for anyone but myself, but I personally got involved by creating regular board game-based media content for at least 2.5 years. And then establishing relationships with other people, other content creators, and other people in the industry over the course of that time. And then attending conventions and being involved in events, both online and in person at conventions and stuff. And to be honest, compared to this group of people here, I feel that I actually got pretty lucky because I haven't been creating content nearly as long as everybody else on this list. So, but regardless of that, I think no matter the amount of time, I think that it was a similar approach. And that's what the approach was. So let me turn off these little pictures here. They're staring at us. Ding, 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 ding. There we go. Okay, so more and more, it seems, especially recently, that more and more content creators, media makers, YouTubers, podcasters are getting involved in the board game industry, in the publishing and game design and industry side of things. So is this a good thing? Is it good for the reviewers to be controlling the means of production? Well, that's the topic I wanted to address here, and I came up with several of the main arguments that I've heard about it, one way or the other, and I'm going to address my opinion on each of those arguments, and then see what everybody is saying in response to that. The first thing that comes up all the time is if a reviewer works in the board game industry, it makes the content that they produce for their own channel or anything biased towards that company. And that's I think that is a valid concern. I don't want to just sweep that under the rug. But at the same time, my opinion is that everyone's biased. I mean, everyone likes a certain type of game. And it seems that one thing that always is overlooked in the big Twitter storm discussions that go on is there is a difference between having a personal preference and opinion and being professional about it. And I think that is really the difference that a lot of people overlook in this conversation. Professionalism is what allows a media personality, whether they're a board game talking head guy or, the anchor on the broadcast nightly news. Professionalism is what allows a media personality to put their own bias aside when necessary and discuss things objectively as any human is capable, at least. But that professionalism is also different than is the counterpoint to bias, because I think it's obvious. If a content creator comes out and on their own channel, all of a sudden, all they start talking about is that company's games that they're working for, or everything's always, perfect with whatever they're professionally involved with, the audience is going to pick up on that, in a second, and it's going to be obvious. So, and I think the professionalism, knowing where to draw that line and how to differentiate that content. Oh, I'm working for this company's website over here. Of course, this content is going to be about the company's website. And here's my personal website over here. My content is going to be about whatever I want it to be about. Some companies still will keep an eye on an employee's personal Facebook pages, YouTube channels, and stuff like that, and will try to extend their reach into those non-corporate areas, those personal outlets, and we'll keep an eye on those and say, hey, even in your personal outlets and stuff, you're still representing the company. And that's something that an employee has to hash out, with the company itself on kind of a company by company basis. But I think I have been really fortunate, and a lot of us in this boat working for the board game industry have been really fortunate in that the feedback we've received is actually not just you may be allowed to continue doing your own personal content, but yes, please do. Actually being encouraged to continue doing as much content as possible, because that's what got you into this position and made you a candidate for this type of position in the first place. So I think that attitude of the board game industry is actually kind of unique, and is a very fortunate one that myself and the others that I've seen doing this have been in. So that's why I think the argument that if a reviewer works for a board game industry, it makes the content they produce biased towards that company. I think that is absolute bollocks if the content creator has a level of professionalism that they can understand where to draw that line. Now let's hop over to the comments real quick and see if anyone has anything to mention in response to that. Poof. Going to search. I forgot to start my search ahead of time. There we go. Whoa. All right. Ooh, wow, lot of comments already. All right. So let's see what some of the people here are saying. I'm just going to pop in here real quick. We have, I think it's always better when people are in control. I always think it's better when the people in control are fans of the subject matter. Okay, we agree there. Kabuki Kid mentions Lance said that Tasty Minstrel Games told him that they want him to remain independent with his reviews and told him not to fear giving Tasty Minstrel Games bad reviews. Wow, to specifically say don't worry about giving us bad reviews. That's a pretty big amount of leeway that they're giving Lance, if that's the case. I know that Tasty Minstrel Games actually published a press release on their website, and in their press release that they sent out, they actually in it were encouraging Lance to keep producing content, and they actually addressed that right in there. So what's neat is Tasty Minstrel Games was very explicit in saying, yeah, we like Lance, and that's one of the reasons he's here, and we want him to keep doing as much as possible, which is just a fantastic foot to get started on. And it just shows, I think, a company and the people involved, both people running the company and the new employee, it shows a mutual passion for the welfare of the board game industry when that approach is taken, which is really neat. Whether or not we all follow through on it and actually live up to the expectations that are set for us or we set for ourselves is one thing, but at least putting it out there and saying, yes, let's have this approach. Let's put the quality of the content being produced ahead of everything else instead of company politics. That type of approach is really fantastic. Okay. I'm going to see. Oh, professionalism. Christian mentions that I think the professionalism of an anchorman is not really comparable to a board game reviewer. As a board game reviewers are highly subjective as people read them for opinions. That's a good point. I can see that because the TV anchorman is more just supposed to be giving you the facts, and a board game reviewer is more of an editorial, like a movie reviewer and such. So that's a good point there, and I think that's fair, Christian. I think a better comparison instead of a news anchorman, a better comparison would be for a movie reviewer. Speaking of which, too, on this very same subject, again, coincidentally, this very same last week, there was on the Channel Awesome YouTube channel, there was a video posted by pop culture reviewer and necktie fashion inspiration, the Nostalgia Critic. He posted a video this very week on his channel called "When Are Critics Wrong?" And he talked about what Christian actually just mentioned, and something I was going to come back to later, but we'll discuss it now since it's topical, is he discussed how movie critics specifically, but it also applies to board game critics, can get it wrong a lot of times. A critic will like something that the public hates and vice versa, because to everyone who watches a movie, it's a storytelling experience and it's an emotional experience. So when a reviewer watches a movie, they can sometimes get caught up in the emotion of it, and it can skew their official review. And sometimes they come back and they'll alter that. Board games are the same thing. You can have a board game, and since it's a social experience, you're playing with other people. And the people that you play it with, I know personally from my experience, can affect your enjoyment of a game. So if you're trying to review a game and get this completely objective experience, the people who you play it with can still color that experience. And you can play a game once with one group and play it again with another group and come away with a completely opposite experience of it through no fault of the game. So being able to filter that out is something that, since we're humans, you can't always do, and can sometimes lead to opinions that are more of opinions that sometimes are not necessarily regrettable, but sometimes need to be amended in the future. And again, the critics do it and the public does it too. It's just part of the emotional experience of storytelling or playing a game. And another thing that the Nostalgia Critic mentioned in his video on the subject was that one thing that reviewers he was talking about movie reviewers, but it also works really, I think it applies maybe even better for board game reviewers and people who talk about board games on a regular basis, is that when you're reviewing board games, you have to play a lot more of them more consistently, more regularly. And when doing that, you become familiar with the stereotypes, the common mechanisms, the cliches in design, and you become a lot more, you become a lot more, you pick them out a lot easier, and they bug you a lot easier sometimes. Oh, another zombie theme. Well, someone over there, a viewer, may only have one zombie game they've ever played and, maybe only have one or two in their collection. They haven't played the 50 plus zombie games that the reviewer had to play last year. So they might not be as tired of the genre as the reviewer is. And the reviewer harping on that in the review may seem out of touch in a way to the public viewer. But it's because the reviewer is inundated with all of these things. And another example of that is when we as board game media personalities start to just throw out catchphrases and things for mechanisms, worker placement, drafting, and stuff like that, exploding dice and things, all of these terms that to us who are working with this every day are just become commonplace parts of our language. But to people viewing them, sometimes you forget, they're not inundated with this every day. They haven't played 3 worker placement games this week. We need to step back and remember to explain what this is so that we don't become stuck in our own little bubble and out of touch. So anyway, I will put after this video is over and it goes live, I'll put a link to the Nostalgia Critic's very interesting video about this, which was titled When Are Critics Wrong? I'll put a link to that in the description below. And in the meantime, I'm going to continue on with my second point on my list, which was number 2. If more social media makers start to work in the board game industry, it will lead to less variety in the kinds of games that are being produced. Because the media makers these media makers have a tendency to like a certain type of game, some will say. And if that influence is made into the industry, it'll lead to more of that type of game being made and less of other types of games. And again, I don't agree at all with that argument. And fortunately, I just happen to have a mic in front of me, so I'll tell you why. Again, yeah, everyone is biased. But one of the things that content creators bring, at least they should be bringing if they're quality content creators, is a passion for board games. And often even for board game publishing. I've dabbled in self-publishing, mostly for comic books and stuff, but I love to produce content. That's one of the reasons why I started a YouTube channel of my own, is because I needed an artistic, creative outlet, because I felt like I was withering and dying inside. Yeah, so that's a good, nice story. Anyway, the point is that a content creator is usually one that has a large audience or receptive audience. That's the word. A receptive audience is a content creator that has a passion for the content, a passion for board games, and not just passion for their own board games, thinking everything else is garbage. Oh, I hate that type of game. It's not this type of game. I don't even want to talk about it. No, having that spirit of exploration, wanting to know everything that they can about games and how they work and new ideas that are coming out and trying new things, and then sharing those ideas with everyone else. Those are the types of content creators that I think are the ones that have the biggest reception, have the largest audience receiving their content well. And when that type of enthusiasm can be taken and applied, that type of open-mindedness and enthusiasm can be applied to actually board game production, then there is no limit to the amount of new ideas that could be coming out. So, and that leads me to kind of segues into the third and final point that I had on this before we'll jump into the YouTube chat again. The third point is that content creators from YouTube and podcasts and stuff like that coming into the industry and actually getting involved on the industry side of things in production and everything is going to turn the board game industry into a, quote, old boys club, where basically, worst case scenario, you got 3 guys that are making every game out there, that everything passes through them. It's an old boys club. Everyone is interconnected. Everyone knows each other. At Gen Con, they're in a back room smoking cigars together, talking about what the next trend in board games for the next year is going to be, laughing and drinking whiskey. And that, I think, is ridiculous. In fact, I think the effect will be just the opposite. And here's why. Because the point of being a content creator, again, the whole point of being a content creator is to build community and engage with people and share ideas with those who wouldn't be involved otherwise. That's the whole reason behind getting a video camera and a mic and starting to record stuff and putting yourself out there, because you want to discuss this with other people and get them involved and engaged and discuss new ideas. So as long as this collaborative spirit of exploration continues, the podcasters' spirit that they have, as long as that continues in the work that's being done by that content creator within the industry, then it will reap dividends. It won't be closing things down and narrowing the focus of the industry. It will be going the other way and reaping dividends of exploring new ideas, bringing new people into the community, bringing in new voices and new ideas. And to be honest, I mean, isn't that spirit of collaborative exploration one of the reasons why all these content creators are being brought on board in the first place? Hey, I love what you're doing to engage the community and increase the awareness of board games. So come help do that for us and apply those same skills to the industry itself. I think that is the direction that it would go in and would ultimately have a wonderful net result. All right, so those are my 3 points about content creators, this flurry of content creators becoming more and more involved in the industry. Let's turn it over to the YouTube comments proper for the rest of the show, and I'll search for that TMG hashtag. And again, anything on this topic or whatever else comes up, we'll see where the discussion goes, and we'll see what people have to say. All right. Thomas, here we go. I think this is where we left off. Thomas mentions, what everybody needs to realize is reviewers are just opinions. And the reason most people watch reviews is just to see the game and to make their own opinion once they have played the game for themselves. That's an excellent point. Reviewers are just other people that happen to have the equipment and the tenacity and the willingness to make this content and put it out there. But yeah, I know that a lot of people I talk about the standard review format of a video, where you have the first half showing how the game works and the second half showing the person's opinion on the game. And it's really interesting because it almost seems to be, when I talk to people about what part of a video they prefer and what they skip to, it almost seems like a 50-50 split. Half of them will watch, just show me the game, show me how it works, make my own opinion. And the second half will be, let me skip to the end to see what they have to say about it, to see how it matches my own opinion on this game, and if it makes me think of things I wouldn't have thought about, and see if it's worth one I want to invest in. So, but regardless of the approach that's taken, I see what you're saying there, Thomas, and I agree. the reviewers are just people posting their opinions, and whether you want to know the game or you want to know someone's feedback on it, it's basically just up to the viewer to make that discernment. Okay. Orioles fan mentions that as someone who helps run a political website, I am told to be as biased as possible because it brings in readers. Now, again, there is a difference, and I can see that. There's a difference between, first, the content produced on your own as a reviewer, a media personality, and the content produced for a specific company. And whatever the company's preference for the type of content being produced, that's between that employee and the company on what their plan is for it. But being as biased as possible, I don't think is a bad thing in the content you produce for yourself. I've mentioned before that if you want to have YouTube viewers, you can be a hero, you can be a villain, but no matter what you do, don't be boring, because people can love you or they can hate you. But if they're like, meh, and they don't care because you don't have an opinion in the first place, they're not going to watch. So being a political website is, I think, a good example of perhaps an extreme, depending on the candidate, I guess. But that is interesting that they said, be as biased as possible, because you want, and I think that's actually valuable lesson for content creators. Not to be as biased as possible, but to make sure that your opinion is clearly stated and have an opinion, actually have a direction that you're going in, have a point to what you're saying. Whether you're Captain Wonderful or a villain, have a point and have a direction that you're going. Jarb mentions that disclaimers are the best idea to avoid anything. This way, we can ensure our viewers and they can take anything with a grain of salt. That's something that I've seen come up a lot, and I think that's a can of worms in and of itself. Some people are like, I've actually seen some people mention on forums and such that every review should come with a disclaimer of whether or not the reviewer purchased this game themselves or they received this game for free from a publisher. That should always be stated right up front. My opinion on that is that that's a waste. That's stupid. And here's why. I guess, and here's why is today's catchphrase. Because it goes right back to the question of professionalism. If you're going to talk about a product, it doesn't matter how you obtained that product. The method by which it came into your possession should have absolutely nothing to do with your opinion on that product. So in that respect, a disclaimer of, I received this game for free or I purchased this game is worthless, because that should have no bearing at all on what the reviewer wants to say about it. Now, if you want to have a disclaimer, and I think there are some things that should be disclaimed beforehand, but that specific thing is not one of them. So don't get me wrong. I think there are things, like when I talk about a game by Passport Game Studios, I feel it's appropriate for me to say, hey, I'm going to be talking about a game that's involved with the company I'm talking about. I think that's important, that I'm involved with. I think that's important, but the level of disclaimer-ness that I've seen requested by some people on forums just borders on the ridiculous. So anyway, let's. I hope I didn't make you feel bad, Jarb. I do think that is an important thing for people to be discussing. It is an important topic for people to go back and forth on. I just gave you my opinion on it. So and I continue to appreciate your contribution. Hope I didn't seem like a meanie in my response there. Okay. Scott mentions that board game reviewers would be more like Sean Hannity, Rachel Maddow types in the media, not like anchors who simply present the information. Rodney Smith from Watch It Played would be more like an anchor man. That touches back to what we talked about before. But it also does put an interesting little extra layer on it, mentioning Watch It Played. it is true. There are different, even in the board game content creator realm, there are different types of presentation, aren't there? There's different types of content being produced. It's not all going to be reviews. Some people actually take the approach of it being more like entertainment first and review second. Me being one of those people, I've always taken that approach. I think the guys from Flip the Table have that approach too, and they pull it off magnificently. They have content, but they I think they see theirs more as entertainment first and information about the game second. So there we have three examples: reviewers, entertainers, and more like anchormen presenting information. So even in this industry, I think that, yeah, you're right. There are going to be different layers of different content creators. And I think it's important for us to realize, kind of how each of us who are creating content fit into that. Good point there. Okay, Kabuki Kid mentions, good point about reviewers seeing everything that is out there and getting burned out on certain genres or mechanisms. The average Joe will have a different reaction to those things. Yep, that's something to always keep in mind as a reviewer, to be able to step back. I always tell myself to remember to step back and see things how someone like I always think of my brother, who's not a board gamer at all. How would he, how would he want this explained to him? And also stepping back and seeing like the game itself, instead of what I want this game to be, what does this game want itself to be, and seeing if it accomplishes that. And again, I think it's something that all reviewers have to be able to unplug from and step back and be able to see. And you can usually tell the reviewers and the content creators that are able to do that. Whether or not I succeed at it, I don't know. But I think that the ones that do a good job are able to successfully do that. Okay, people talking about when critics have made the wrong call on movies. Digital Sextant mentions that commonplace language also helps build a community, though. Making a balance between using/not using jargon allows people to start feeling like an insider, too. That is true. Talking about like the terms worker placement, exploding dice, and stuff like that. So to clarify my opinion on that, I agree. I don't think that jargon shouldn't be used because I think it is something that can make someone feel inclusive. I know when I started to learn those terms, I felt like, hey, I'm more of a part of this community. This is awesome. I can go down to my game club and say worker placement and people, I'm part of the club. I think that's good. But when someone who is creating the media content talking about that, just keep in mind that every video that is being watched is someone's first video. And every podcast, same thing. Every podcast episode is someone's first episode. So if you use that jargon, make sure to keep yourself aware and, keep your brother in mind who's not a board gamer and explain it so that the new person who comes along will understand what you're talking about. And it's something that it's balance, because to the person creating the content, that repetition of definition can become very tedious, and to the listening audience, it can become tedious as well. So sometimes it's actually a balancing act to find that equilibrium between how often do I explain what this is and potentially bore my audience versus how often do I explain this so the new people are catching on to what we're saying and feel included. Excellent point there. And the YouTube comments just jumped, and so I have to find where we were. Commonplace language. We found where we were. Thank you. C. Pruce mentions, I think the volume of games played by reviewers skews the industry towards cult of the new. Most people can't afford in time or money to play new games all the time. That's a very interesting point about this too. Reviewers, it's kind of a double-edged sword. And there's this, in one way, I totally agree, because reviewers always talking about new games, and it seems like within the last year, it seems like reviewers are starting to produce videos about games that aren't even going to be published for like 3 or 6 months in the future sometimes. So it seems like we're not only this cult of the new, but I've heard it referred to as cult of the future, where, oh, your game finally arrives in the mail. Well, I am not even going to break the shrink wrap because here's this next game I'm going to go pre-order and get. It can become this really vicious cycle. At the same time, though, if a reviewer's bread and butter is in reviewing games, well, of course they're going to have to keep talking about new games and everything that comes along, especially in an industry where, at Essen alone, the biggest, but still just one board game trade show, at Essen alone, over 600 new board games were announced. So that's like playing 2 a day just from Essen would take you through the whole year. With so much content going out, so many new board games being created, it makes sense that a reviewer to continue being someone who communicates the information about the industry and the products available in the industry, makes sense that they're going to have to be churning out a lot. I always make the comparison in my own mind to electronics reviewers, tablets, new laptops and stuff like that. Those are reviews that I actually enjoy watching as well to see what's coming out and what people have to say about things. But that too, you're just inundated all the time with all of these, a new device comes out and a week later it's obsolete. And I think in terms of the amount of board games being created, the small electronics reviewers are actually a good analogy. See what they're doing and how they deal with all this constantly new content that, if not cult of the new, is always being pushed and obsolete with being replaced with new content. Anyway, thank you for the thought there, Mr. Proust. That's an excellent contribution to the conversation, and I appreciate it. We could go off on a whole tangent there, but for now, let's continue with the next statements here. Orioles fan, I think in response to that, says absolutely not. Content creators will bring new ideas to a stale company. Also, do you have any of your comics left I would love to read? Okay, well, first of all, the absolutely not, I guess, was in response to one of the bullet points that I made earlier, not in response to C. Bruce's comment in the chat right above it. So that's good. So, I totally agree, as I mentioned before. And regarding the comments, I might have a box in my attic with a few leftover copies. I don't know. I'd have to go dig them out. It's been nearly 20 years since some of those comics were produced. So it's been a while. So anyway, so I don't know about the availability. I'd have to check. If I can find a few, maybe I could bring a couple to a convention or something. I don't know. Okay. Bruce again mentions, continuing the conversation here, this has led to the somewhat concerning rise of the legacy or one-time play games. They're very good, but I'm not in love with the trend as a consumer. And then Digital Sextant, I think in reply to that, says, I think the content creators have bias towards novelty, so they will continue to be interested in the new. Interesting. So is a content creator or board game reviewers thirst for new ideas causing them to latch on to things like legacy games and one-time play games like Time Stories and such that they wouldn't otherwise if they weren't inundated with so much content that's the same. These things that stand out as something different. Does that make these things that stand out, does that make them stand out even more and thus receive more attention from a reviewer? I think that's possible. I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing as long as it's, that is something to think about. I'm thinking about myself personally. I harp a lot on innovation. I hate seeing the game stamped with like Monopoly, how every other Thursday there's a new version of Monopoly where 99.9% of the times it's just a new brand stamped onto Monopoly and put on the shelf. Now it's My Little Pony Monopoly. Now it is Monopoly. Give it a week. We'll see that. That I can't stand. And so I always kind of harp on innovation. Things like, even Risk, which does that a lot, thing after thing after thing of Risk, When Risk Legacy came out, I jumped on that bandwagon because it was a twist on the previous Risk formula. And the fact that it was a legacy game, which we hadn't seen before, just was an extra benefit to it. So yeah, I think that it's, what would we call that? It's not necessarily cult of the new, cult of the unique. That may be a thing that might be worth exploring in a future conversation. Cult of the unique. Do games that do something different and novel, do they get extra attention that they wouldn't otherwise? Thank you. That was very interesting. All right. Let's see here. Oh, jumped again. So let's see here. Noonie Kurt. Hi. I think this is the first time I've seen a comment from you, so it's nice to meet you. Says, hi, Chaz. I don't see the board game industry becoming an old boys club. The more people that come into the industry, the more diverse the hobby will become. That means more choice for everybody. I agree. And I guess the point I was trying to make is that if the people that are, if the board game industry is bringing in a lot of people who do the same thing, content creators, podcasters, video creators, if they're bringing in this, for lack of a better word, clique of people that have this passion for making content and have that like-mindedness, is there a danger of them having a like-mindedness in the types of games that are being produced and biasing that? And again, though, I don't think so. I think just the opposite. But hopefully that also helps clarify what the point I was trying to make earlier if it wasn't. So excellent. So I totally agree with that. Digital Sextant states, what do you think about reviewers openly refraining from reviewing games that they were involved with? For example, you'd not mention Passport games. That, I think, goes along with the question of professionalism. Also, respect, in a way, for the company that you work for. That's horrible. Scratch that. Let's not say respect. Let's say self-preservation. Let's be blunt. If Bob works for Company X and then Bob comes out and says Company X's products are horrible, when Bob goes into work on Monday, he might not have a job there anymore. Which, in a capitalist world is completely, I think, I can't even think of the word, but it makes sense, because it's you have a relationship with that employer. Anyway, but what do I think about reviewers openly refraining from reviewing the games that they're involved with? I think that is I think it also has to do with professionalism, and it's a fine line. Now, I have spoken about, both on Board Game Breakfast and on Metagame episodes, I have spoken about Passport Game Studios games. And what I've done is I've given a disclaimer, said, hey, I'm about to talk about a game from a company that I'm now involved with. And I've gone into that. But so it's one of those things, I think it's up to the individual reviewer. If the reviewer is afraid to even broach the subject, I think that could lead to a negative view on their ability to talk about the subject. And so I think that the reviewer needs to think really long and hard about getting involved with a company in the same industry that they review. Before I took the job at Passport, I had several conversations, with my wife, myself, actually Mr. Vassal. We talked about it a little bit. Obviously Scott at Passport, we talked about that too. And so it was not a decision that was taken lightly. It was something that's like, yeah, this is obviously going to have an effect one way or another on the content that's being produced. So let's make sure that everybody is on the same page about that and make sure that everyone knows what the expectations are about the type of things that are said. Again, I think I'm really fortunate because I think I'm in a position similar to the one that Tasty Minstrel Games set up for Lance, in that it's like, we encourage you to continue producing the content you are producing, as long as, whatever you say, have facts to back it up, go for it. I think that it's really fortunate to be in that type of position. But I think it's a touchy subject where not one person like me can't come out and say, here's the rule. Here's the way it should be done. Here's what you should worry about. I think it's something, again, going back to the self-preservation thing between that employee and the company they're working for. It's something they need to work out for between themselves because everyone has a different view on that type of thing. I hope that makes sense. All right. Let's see here. W. O'Hara states, I'm interested in a reviewer's opinions as long as he or she state their biases up front. I have no problem with a reviewer being biased. I certainly am. And there's still value there. Excellent point. Stating their biases up front. Now, would you mean their opinion on the product up front or just their biases for things in that industry in general? Because if someone comes up and says, I hate this game, let's review it. Well, it's kind of, I don't know, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's what you're looking for, but it also seems like it could sour you on the rest of it. You could see the rest of their presentation through those rose-colored or the glasses that they're seeing it through. But that is interesting. But I also agree completely that there's no problem with a reviewer being biased because everyone is biased. And again, it's just how you treat that bias in the content you're creating is what's important. Satya mentions, I use reviews for A, information on what new games are out there, B, information on those games to form my own opinion, and C, entertainment. Doesn't matter if I agree with the reviewer at all. Those are, I think each of those are excellent points. And I think that also, flip the tables around, I think that's what reviewers have in mind too, lots of times. When I create a video, sometimes A, I want to talk about new games and ideas that are out there. B, I want to give information about those games and my own opinion on it. And C, to create something that's entertaining. So I think that door swings both ways, both from the viewer and the content creator. Cool. Noonie Kurt mentions again, concerning biased reviews. The only thing that you can appraise objectively is maybe the quality of the components. Everything else is opinion. And that's a good thing. That's what I'm interested in. Everything else is opinion. Yeah, like I mentioned before, some content creators try to be objective, but really you can only be as objective as human beings can be. No human being is going to be 100% objective. It's just not possible because we got personalities and they're going to flow through in the content that we create. I'll give you a moment to chew on that disturbing mental image, and then we'll continue on. Scott mentions, knowing a reviewer bias/preference is really helpful. If somebody says, I normally don't like this mechanism, but in this game, it just works, that means something significant to me. And that's a really good point, because there's an example of something we didn't really touch on. Because bias is typically, at least to me, put in a negative light. Whenever you talk about bias, it's usually a bad thing. But here's how bias can be a tool for conveying some information in a way. Like you said, if someone says, I don't normally like this mechanism, but in this game it just works, that can be, in a way, more praise for a certain game. They took something I don't like and they pulled it off. So that way, knowing the user's bias and having the content creator make their biases known can actually be really beneficial to the review. Good point. Very cool. David mentions, I think having reviewers working for the industry keeps the corporate people knowing that what the end users would want and not just making games to make money for only money-making reasons. I hope so. I certainly hope so. And I think that varies, as in with any industry, that varies from one corporate philosophy to another. But I certainly hope that you're right. Power to the gamers. Woo! Okay. Let's see here. Satya mentions, thank you for jumping comment. Satya mentioned something, and it was probably really, really good, but the comments jumped again. So we're going to try and find where we left off. People talk about Rodney Smith invading my YouTube chat area once again. I think we found it. Sacha mentions, if all the reviewers would have to buy all their games, we would have so many complaints about more games not getting reviewed. I was still thinking about my mental image there, the flowing there. I got sucked into that again. So I think what you're saying is that if the reviewers had to buy their own games, there'd be a lot fewer games being reviewed because the reviewers wouldn't be able to buy every game that's out there to be reviewed. I totally agree with that. Again, going back to the small electronics reviews and stuff like that, small electronics are really expensive. And those companies send out, review materials. Sometimes the reviewer gets to retain them after the review. Sometimes they actually have to pass the materials, the devices on to the next reviewer or return them. But that is something that is really, really, if the companies did not provide the small electronics content to be reviewed, there'd be no reviews for those. And board games the same way with the amount of content being produced. I know that Tom from the Dice Tower often talks about how he has a whole queue, which seems to grow and grow every year of games that are pending review and pending being played because there's just so many of them. If the reviewers in this or any industry always had to purchase what they are reviewing, I don't think much of anything would be reviewed. And I'll just leave it at that. Okay. Kabuki Kid mentions, how come we don't have an angry board game nerd doing video content yet? I think that's in response to the angry nerd doing movie reviews. I'm sure that if you look hard enough, there's got to be some angry nerd somewhere doing video content for board games. Maybe they just disguise it well. Or if not, there's a whole niche for board game reviews that no one's filling yet, potentially. Okay. David mentions that he agrees, Chaz, free copy is irrelevant. Tom would have to say that for every single thing on his reviews. If a reviewer purchases it, he could mention he was looking forward to the game and picked it up. And again, I don't think it has to be a certain way. I'm not saying you must say this or it must not be said. I don't care if the reviewer says it or not. I think it should be inconsequential. And therefore, I think it's a non-issue because, again, it shouldn't matter. And so, to my opinion, who cares? So, but again, it's the quality of the content that's important, not how you obtained the thing that you're reviewing. Christian mentions, let's see here. Christian mentions, isn't some kind of disclaimer needed for review copies? At the end of the Dice Tower podcast, there's always mentioned promotional considerations are provided by publishers in the form of review copies of games. I can't speak to that because I don't know what the purpose of that disclaimer is at the end of the Dice Tower audio podcasts. I've certainly heard it too, and I've wondered about it. I've never remembered to ask. I've always wanted to ask at a convention, but I never get a chance to. But so I can't say, well, the reason that's there is because blah, because it's not my show. So I'm going to let them talk about that. But in terms of needed for review copies, again, I don't know everything in the world, so I'm not going to say, no, it's not needed, and then have someone say, oh, look, this statute, blah, 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 actually says technically you're supposed to. So I don't know. There might be something that technically it's supposed to be needed. But I will say this, from my own experience, again, board game reviews, small electronics reviews, reviews of everything out there, you could probably count on one hand, even one hand after having a fireworks mishap, the number of reviewers out there that actually do consistently state that they received a review copy for free. And so I think that the people that make a big fuss about the board game industry aren't seeing that everyone else that reviews everything that's not a board game is in the same boat and takes pretty much the same approach as the board game reviewers do. So again, it might be a courtesy thing, and I don't know if there's some sort of pseudo requirement that's supposed to be there by some governing body. But again, I personally am of the opinion it's a non-issue. So I don't know, but I would not think so, because if it is, then a lot of us are doing it wrong. Okay, we got time for 2 or 3 more questions here. O'Hara mentions again, reviewers who actually take the time to go back to older designs get my respect, like Marco is doing. Yep. Respect someone who can go in and not always be sucked in by the cult of the new, but talk about old favorites and stuff. I agree with that. And let's see. Oh, slight jump again. Sorry. Some more talk about older games. I'm looking for one good question to end with. Jumped again. No. Okay, I'm going to go to the end. Sorry. If you want a comment considered, post it right now, because I'm jumping to the end of the comments for the last response. So I'm going to scroll down because this thing is just jumping horribly. And we have Zenitos. Hello. Zenitos's comment is, the industry isn't just one thing, it's many. Publishing makes the most money, but if it went away, people would still buy, design, play, and merchandise games. That's a good point where we talk about the industry. I mean, the board game industry does include that and even a lot more. There's conventions, there's local game clubs, there's there's the printing industries like Panda, which prints a lot of the board games that we play, and also the companies that make the components. There actually is a lot of other sub industries involved in this, and so I wonder if it's even possible for there to be the type of influence from one specific group of people that we've talked about. Is it something where it's just too broad for half dozen board gamers, content creators to influence it? Or is it that the other way around, where a half dozen board game media creators could get into the industry and have it ripple out from them and affect everyone else? That's the question that obviously after this hour-long discussion is still a question, so I did not really answer at all. So, good for me. On that note, I will turn things back over to the rest of the internet and we'll shut down this episode. But I want to thank everyone, old and new, that came along and took the time to follow along and post comments and statements and questions in the chat log. I really, really appreciate it. And to keep the conversation going, be sure that after this, and as you're floating around the internets, be sure to subscribe to both the Dice Tower and the Pair of Dice Paradise YouTube channels for more board game news and reviews and commentary and shows like this. And also, be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter as well, where we can keep the conversation going. But for now, I have been Chaz Marler, and together with the comments section on YouTube, we have been playing the Metagame. Until next episode, take care.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.